I'm Keith Byerly with the Agoro Carbon Alliance. My role at the Agoro Carbon Alliance is to serve as the regional sales manager for Nebraska, Kansas, Colorado, and Wyoming. And really what that means in a nutshell is that I get an opportunity to work with our team of agronomists. I get an opportunity to work with agronomists that might be at retail facilities like co-ops or independents, with precision ag specialists, and with independent agronomists, all in the scope of education and helping find and train growers and train folks to be better decision makers. And what I mean by better decision makers is that our staff is incredibly knowledgeable, but if you move us 100 miles west or 100 miles south, our knowledge may not translate linearly to the soil, the weather, the cultural factors that they've got in play in those environments. We really need to have not only the grower engaged, but also their trusted advisor, that person that's part of the decision-making process and spends their time learning and helping the grower think critically through these things, because ultimately it's not just a decision to change tillage practices or to implement cover crops, but there are a lot of management decisions and a lot of equipment decisions that go into that as well. And that's where we have to have these resources in place to help growers. My background is that I spent the last 2 years working for a group called the Soil Health Partnership, doing these exact same things, helping growers through Nebraska and Kansas implement soil health practices on their farm. And ultimately that was the transitional piece that got me into the world of taking those same practices and turning them into carbon sequestration and helping growers monitorize that. But even before that, I spent the last 18 years operating or working in a precision ag group for a large retailer in Nebraska, Kansas, and Iowa. So when a grower makes this decision to implement cover crops onto their farm, I think there's really kind of 5 key components that have to be part of either the implementation of that decision or getting through that decision-making process, if you will. And so that first one, ironically, is to start at the end. And what I mean by that is that the termination of cover crops is probably the absolute first decision that we need to make. Do I have enough labor and equipment on hand to terminate these cover crops mechanically or with herbicides? Or do I need to let Mother Nature take care of that and pick species that winter kill? If I've got the equipment, is it tillage equipment and I want to do it through tillage? Is it a sprayer? I want to use chemicals to terminate those cover crops through that application with other things that I do. And then the timing of it. Do I do it 2 weeks ahead of planting? Do I plant green? You know, all of these decisions are going to impact maybe some upgrades that you have to make to your planter, or upgrades that you have to make to the nozzle selection that you have on those sprayers. All these little key decisions about cover crops really impact how you set up your equipment to be successful throughout the course of the year. Then the second component is to start at the beginning. And here, what we're really thinking about is when to plant. You know, if I've got the equipment as far as tractors and planters and manpower to put into it, I can plant my cover crops after I take that cash crop out. That may work great in a southern environment, but if you move into Nebraska or South Dakota, sometimes that weather window closes and we don't see that growth that we want to see. So then we may make a decision, either weather-wise or because of the resources I've got, to have somebody else come in and do that cover crop planting as an interseeding with an airplane or with a fertilizer spreader, or maybe even it's rigging up a box to do that interseeding on your own and plant that crop at V5 or V6 and get it in there, or use a high clearance machine and plant it at tassel time or senescence time, just getting a jump start on the next work that we have to do. That when to plant is a huge component about making sure that you've got your manpower and your equipment allocated to the right pieces of the year. Third component is really, what are my goals? Are my goals strictly to use cover crops to build as much organic matter and carbon as I can? Which is certainly a fair decision, but there's also other components around that soil health that really shouldn't be overlooked. When I've got a field like this that's rolling, I may want to use something that has very fibrous roots to help to help hold that soil to prevent erosion, especially in the spring. If I've got lowland like I've got behind me here, I may need to select a cover crop that helps us dry out soil in the spring, so I don't have to hit it with a disc and turn it into rocks and concrete that's hard to plant, but I can let that cover crop do that work. Do I need to improve water holding capacity? Do I need to improve water infiltration? All of these soil health components really then drive the one that so many people jump to first, and that's what to plant. The what to plant is an enabler of all of those other goals. Do I need to dry soils out and use a cereal rye? I think a lot of growers all too often when they jump into cover crops for the first time get lured in by this grand illusion of multiple species and how wonderful they are. And they are. They have huge benefits when they're selected properly, but they may not be the right component to jump into for your first year or your second year in cover crops. Sometimes less is more. Really focusing again back what that key component is. If I need to hold soil, if I need to build fibrous roots, triticale, cereal rye, some things like that are really great. If I've chopped this thing for silage or seed corn or something like that, where I've really removed a lot of the biomass out there and not left a lot of residue or ground cover, I may need a brassica, something that grows really rapidly that covers and shades the ground. Same component if I move into some of our wheat producing areas where crops come out in the summertime. Shading that ground to prevent more moisture loss going into a next crop in the fall or into that next crop of the rotation can be a huge component. So you can see I may not just be making one cover crop decision for my farm. I may need different cover crops for different points in my species rotational cycle to really enable all the things that I want to do. And then I think probably the last one is that you get this wonderful green growing out there in the fall or early in the spring, and inevitably there's a knock on your door, there's a ring on your phone, or you've got the cattle yourselves. Somebody's got this idea of, can I turn my cows out there? Can I turn that into pounds of gain on my cattle? And you know, that's going to affect your species selection. That's going to affect some herbicide decisions that you make along the way. But it can also have great benefits to the end goal in building carbon and building soil health, because when those cattle graze, not only are they out there adding fertilizer to your farm, they're actually also producing root exudates by yanking on those plants and causing those roots to secrete some of this glue that really has tons of benefits to our soil. So yeah, waiting for a cover crop to grow each year or only having that happen for a few months at a time, I think it's also really crucially important to have some ways that we can go out there and we can quantify what we're seeing to have some measurables. And I think the first one and one of the absolute simplest and favorite ones is to grab that tile spade. What a soil looks like on top of a hill versus the draw versus the lowlands, those are all going to have different colors. They're going to have different feels to them, different smells, the five senses sort of test. But when I put these cover crops to work on the farm, I'm going to see different reactions. A cereal rye may have a completely different effect 3 or 4 years from now on a bottom ground than it might have on these transitional periods like where I stand. Those senses of digging that out of the ground and seeing it don't cost a thing, and they're really pretty tangible. You're going to know if you see those earthworms in there. You're going to know if I've got a different color to my soil here than maybe the soil that's across the fence and those pieces. Another really key component for folks that are rain fed is to maybe grab an infiltration ring, look those up online and see what they consist of. But really it's just a very simply put a piece of pipe that you hammer down into the ground and you can pour some water into to see how fast your soil uptakes water. That water uptake can be a key component to being more resilient when we get these thunderstorms that maybe drop 5 inches of rain at a time or 3 inches of rain at a time, to keep things from running off and also feed those cash crops as we get later on in the season. So simple tools like that, there's a million of them. Burying underwear to see your microbes respond and things like that are a great way to stay engaged with the process, even when things maybe aren't really exciting and green and growing out in your field. So as far as the in-season component of things goes, I think it largely goes back to what those indecisions are. You know, if I'm going to terminate that crop in the spring, I've really got to make sure that I don't miss my window. I've got to spend a little time out there scouting, making sure that I've got those things in vegetative stages when they're easier to terminate versus getting into reproductive stages, not letting them get away from me and monitoring them that way. If I've incorporated that grazing or some of these other components, I may want to consider some fertilization of these cover crops just to make sure that I'm getting the biomass that I want to see and hitting on some of those goals and making sure that that fits into the totality of my program as well. And then of course, there's just the stand establishment. If I'm going to turn cattle out there, I want to make sure that I've got the proper stand. I want to make sure I've got the proper species. I want to make sure that this cover crop is choking out weeds, and how does that affect herbicide decisions going in to the next growing season. So really, those components of being out there and monitoring the cover crop while it's growing and really immediately after you terminate it continue to feed into a lot of the decision-making process on the farm throughout the course of the year.